Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 230 and it's titled Minthara's Myriad of Landfall. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So today, our random card was suggested to us by Tequila over on YouTube, and that card is Minthara, Merciless Soul. So Minthara is 2 white-black for a 2/2 legendary creature elf cleric. She has Ward X, where X is the number of experience counters you have. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you get an experience counter, and creatures you control get +1/+0 for each experience counter that you have. Now, Minthara, since she is a legendary creature and can be in our command zone, obviously is going to be our commander for this week. And this is a commander that I have had requested a couple of times, and I never quite knew how to build around it, until eventually I settled on some very unique synergies with the Discord, which, by the way, if you're interested in joining my Discord, feel free to head on over to Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member, as a quick plug. But we worked on some very unique aspects of this deck, so let's pick apart some of our themes for today and take a look exactly at what is going to make this deck run. Starting off, our first major theme is Myriad. Because Myriad is an ability that exiles a token at the end of combat, that does count as something leaving the battlefield and can therefore trigger Minthara without us having to actually sacrifice any of our permanents. A lot of the Minthara decks I've seen in the past have been aristocrat based. They want to sacrifice things, and while that's very cool, very powerful, it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I think leaning more into Myriad gives it a little bit of a unique flavor that I really enjoy as a player. And a good example of some of the cards that we want to be using is Hammers of Moradin, which is 2 and a white for a 3/3 creature dwarf cleric. They've got Myriad, so whenever they attack, for each opponent other than defending player, create a token that's a copy of this creature that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Then we exile those tokens at the end of combat. Then, Hammers of Moradin, whenever they attack, for each opponent, tap up to 1 target creature that player controls. While this doesn't initially seem that powerful, it's just a 3-mana 3/3 for each opponent, it's able to trigger Revolt, essentially, being able to give us an experience counter with Minthara. Minthara, with more experience counters, will make our creatures bigger, meaning that the Myriad tokens are bigger, and then it's also going to be tapping down creatures our opponents control, letting us get in more damage and kind of sneakily add up the damage throughout the course of the game. Because a lot of times our opponents aren't going to want to trade with a 3-mana 3/3, especially once it starts to get really big. So it's a very sneaky way to deal the damage and to trigger Minthara, and it kind of does everything we want it to be doing. Next, though, moving on to the second theme, which is one of the main reasons I wanted to build this deck, and that one is Landfall. And more specifically, I wanted to build around the lands that can sacrifice themselves, because again, that will also trigger Minthara, getting us more experience counters. So that means we get to play cards like Obscura Storefront, which is a land. When it enters, you immediately sacrifice it, and when you do, you search your library for a basic plains, island, or swamp, put it onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle, and gain 1 life. This is probably one of my favorite ways to play a white deck, and I understand that Minthara is white-black, but there are a lot of synergies in white that allow us to use lands to this effect. By sacrificing them and putting them into our graveyard, we are of course triggering Minthara, but that also means we're getting 2 land drops in a turn. We play Obscura Storefront, and then we get whatever land we get with it, meaning that we can double trigger our landfall effects every single turn. And there's a lot of white cards that can return lands from the graveyard, specifically returning things mana value 3 or less, which of course lands are, and that is a great way for us to ramp, trigger our landfall synergies, trigger Minthara, and then use our Myriad creatures to close out the game. And then finally, we get to our last theme of the deck, and this one is Blink. This is a strategy that's a lot more common in Minthara decks, but it's a great way to protect our commander because our entire game plan revolves around having her on the battlefield. So we have cards like Cloud Shift, which is 1 white mana for an instant, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. Being able to blink our commander means we can protect her from targeted removal, which is even deadlier for our opponents once we get a ton of experience counters, because if they don't pay the ward, their removal spell is countered anyway, but we can actually wait until they do pay the ward to cast our Cloud Shift and then save our commander anyway, which if we have it, say, 5 experience counters and our opponents have to spend 5 mana on a top of whatever they're paying for their removal spell, that can be absolutely backbreaking late in the game and almost force our opponents to skip an entire turn. Plus, if we're doing this on our turn, we get to trigger Minthara. It's something leaving the battlefield, we get to trigger a bunch of other effects like Revolt, and it gives us a way to close out the game by pumping up the rest of our creatures. Anyway though, those are all of our themes for this week, so the next thing I want to do is of course take a look at some key cards in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in a lot of cases are win conditions or value engines all on their own. So starting off, our first key card is going to be Another Round, one of my personal favorite cards to come out of OTJ. It is XX2 white for a sorcery that says exile any number of creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control, then repeat this process X more times. So at its worst, this is 3 mana, exile as many creatures as we want, and then return them to the battlefield. That's already pretty decent, but being able to ramp this up as the game goes long, and the fact that we have so many ways to ramp additional lands into play, means that we can very easily cast this where X is 3, 4, 5, and if we can blink an entire board of ETB creatures 5 times, there is a very good chance that we win the game right there on the spot. So Another Round is incredibly powerful, and yes, it's very mana intensive, but because of our ramp package, we can very easily cast this for a pretty significant amount. Moving on to our second key card. This one is Legion Loyalty. Again, a very expensive card, but one that is very worth it. It is 6 white for an enchantment that simply says, creatures you control have Myriad. Having Myriad naturally on a lot of our creatures is very powerful, but being able to put it on everything means that we now have Myriad on things like Sun Titan, on Callous Blood Mage, things that have enter the battlefield effects, and so by attacking with those creatures, we create token copies of them and get those enter the battlefield effects again, giving us a huge way to really push through damage, especially once Minthara has a ton of experience counters, and put us in a position where no matter what our opponents are doing, they are unable to block our creatures because they're so big they'll kill their creatures, but they also can't afford not to block because it might just cost them the game, while at the same time, we are generating so much value that we are putting ourselves so far ahead we don't even care if our creatures get blocked and die, and honestly, we can probably bring them back even if they do. So Legion Loyalty is by far one of the best win conditions in this deck, and is very, very satisfying when you can really get it to pop off. Anyway though, moving on to our final key card for this week, we have Sarevok Deathbringer. And this is a card that doesn't look like much on the surface, but as the game goes on, this is another one of our main win conditions. Sarevok is 3 and a black for a 3/4 legendary creature human knight. At the beginning of each player's end step, if no permanents left the battlefield this turn, that player loses X life, where X is Sarevok's power. Then, of course, choose a background, which is irrelevant for this deck since Sarevok is not in our command zone. But the important thing to remember about Sarevok is that it triggers in each player's end step. Our entire game plan revolves around us triggering Minthara, and therefore having something leave our battlefield on our turn. that means we are very unlikely to ever lose life to Saravok. However, because of Minthara, she is going to be boosting Saravok's power equal to our experience counters, meaning if we get to 5 experience counters, Saravok now has 8 power, and at the end of each player's turn, if something didn't leave their battlefield, they will lose 8 life, and this continues to stack as the game goes on, and eventually our opponents are going to be forced to try to remove something on their board every single turn, because if they don't, they'll probably just die to Saravok, draining them out, and then that kind of puts them at a disadvantage because they may not want to get rid of their own permanents, but they may not have another choice. So Saravok really does end games and is a great way for us to close things out if we're unable to get through with combat damage. Anyway though, that brings us to the end of our key cards section. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize well together, but in a lot of cases are just kind of fun cards that I want to highlight. So starting off, our first cool interaction is between Iridescent Vinelasher and Ruin Ghost. Iridescent Vinelasher, 1 black mana for a 1/2 Lizard Assassin. It has Offspring of 2, so as we cast it, we can pay an additional 2, and then we create an additional 1/1 token copy of it when it enters. Plus, it has Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. That means that with Ruin Ghost, which is 1 and a white for a 1/1 spirit, we can pay a white and tap it to exile target land we control and return it to the battlefield under your control. This is, to the best of my knowledge, the only effect in Magic that allows you to blink a land, and if we have landfall creatures in play, like Iridescent Vinelasher, we can use this to very quickly end games because we can do 2 damage every single time any land enters if we have Offspring to the Vinelasher, and then we can blink that land with Ruin Ghost and do another 2 damage to an opponent, essentially allowing us for just a single white mana and our land drop to do 4 damage to any opponent. And that is the kind of thing that can end games when we can do it every single turn. Plus, on top of all of our attacking synergies and being able to pump up our creatures, this is one of those ways that, again, without combat, gives us an avenue to victory. Moving on though, to our second cool interaction. This one is more a highlight of an interaction that I want to make sure people know about if you are playing this deck. And that is between Fiend Hunter and Gilrain Dunedain Protector. So Fiend Hunter is 1 white for a 1/3 human cleric. When it enters, you may exile another target creature, and when it leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. The important part about Fiend Hunter is that those are 2 separate paragraphs. So when it enters, you exile a creature, and when it leaves, you return the creature. Those are 2 separate abilities, meaning that while Fiend Hunter is coming into play, and you have the first ability on the stack, you can actually exile it or destroy it, and then it will return the exiled card before it actually exiles that card, meaning you can permanently exile a card with Fiend Hunter if you're able to blink or kill it with its first ability on the stack. And one of the best ways we can do that is with Gilrain Dunedain Protector, which is 2 and a white for a 2/3 legendary creature human noble. You can pay 2 and tap her to exile another target creature you control. You may return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you don't, at the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a vigilance counter and a lifelink counter. This essentially allows us to, for 5 mana, being able to play the Fiend Hunter and activate Gilrain, to exile permanently any creature in play, and then return the Fiend Hunter to play and be able to get another creature at least temporarily exiled. But on top of all of that, if we have multiple ways to blink a creature, we can continuously blink Fiend Hunter in response to its first ability hitting the stack and permanently exile quite a few cards at the table. Now, obviously, this does require a lot of mana, but again, as I mentioned earlier, we have no issue acquiring lands in this deck, so this can be a great removal package if that's something you need as the game goes on. That, though, brings us to the end of our cool interactions for today. And the next thing I want to do for our deck tech is, of course, take a look at the price of the deck. So today, our total deck price came in at $93.92, with the most expensive card in the deck being Battle Angels of Tyr at $16.24. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I don't believe Battle Angels of Tyr is worth that price tag. That's not to say it's a bad card. It is a very good card. However, I don't think it's $16 worth of good, because it is 2 white for a 4/4 creature, Angel Knight. It has flying and Myriad, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card if that player has more cards in hand than each other player. Then you create a treasure token if that player controls more lands than each other player. Then you gain 3 life if that player has more life than each other player. Because this has got Myriad, and it's going to be hitting, at least hopefully hitting, every opponent, the only way that those abilities on Battle Angel would not trigger is if we have the most cards in hand, most lands, or more life. And so there is a very good chance that every time it attacks, we are drawing a card, making a treasure token, and gaining 3 life. And while that is a very powerful effect, and this is by far one of the best Myriad creatures in the entire deck, if not the entire game, I don't know if it's fully worth the $16 price tag. So if you do need to trim a little bit on budget purposes, you can cut out Battle Angels of Tyr, and honestly, I don't think the deck would suffer that much for it. On the other hand, if you wanted to increase the price of the deck and add in a card that is, in this case, slightly outside of our budget, I do have a suggestion for you there as well, because this week I would recommend you put in Jadar, Ghoul Caller of Nephalia, and of course, if you're putting a card in, you'd have to take a card out, so I would recommend taking out Cartographer's Hawk. But starting off with Jadar, he is 1 and a black for a 1/1 legendary creature human wizard. At the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. This is probably one of the most efficient ways for us to continuously trigger Minthara and also continuously do damage. Because if we can make a 2/2 zombie every single turn, we then attack with it the next turn, it's going to be sacrificed at the end of combat, triggering Minthara, getting us more experience counters, and then at the end of our turn, we no longer have a decayed zombie, so we get to make another one and repeat the process all over again, with the zombie getting bigger every time because Minthara's giving us more experience counters. So Jadar is really perfect for the deck, and he is just barely outside of our budget, so I am very sad I couldn't include him. However though, as I mentioned, if you are putting a card in, you've got to take a card out, and I think Cartographer's Hawk is the one to take the hit this week. It is 1 and a white for a 2/1 creature bird. It's got flying. When it deals combat damage to a player who controls more lands than you, return it to its owner's hand. If you do, you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Now, I think that Cartographer's Hawk is a pretty solid card, especially if you can actually get it into play on turn 2. However, in my playtesting with this deck, I very rarely found that we had less lands than our opponents, which made Cartographer's Hawk significantly worse and was therefore not really worth it. And it's weird to say that we typically had the most lands considering we're an Orzhov deck, but because of the ramp, because of the recursion, it was very possible that we had more lands than even the green players at the table. And when Cartographer's Hawk isn't doing anything and it's just a 2-mana 2/1 flyer, it would be much better when replaced with Jadar, who can trigger Minthara every single turn. With that being said though, That brings us to the end of our deck tech for today. And before we jump into a game with this deck and see how it functions, I do want to take a second to shout out our current patrons and channel members. And as always, remind you all that if you are interested in joining our Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member, you can find us over on patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide or right here with the link that's in the video description below. But joining either of those gives you access to an amazing Discord community. I genuinely do enjoy having everybody in there. They're great for helping to build decks, they're great for playing the games that appear on the channel, and overall it's just a phenomenal group. So if you're interested in that or any of the other benefits that you get for joining the Patreon or the channel membership, then please do check them out. And if that's not quite your style, or maybe it's just not the time for you, I would love it if you would at least like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps out a lot and it lets me know what people are interested in for future deck techs. With that out of the way though, let's take a look at our opponents for this week and see how we can get our Minthara deck to perform in a game. So today, we are being joined by Doodle playing Skeleton Ship, Jason playing Ezio Blade of Vengeance, and Bilal playing Zaxara the Exemplary. Starting off with Doodle and his Skeleton Ship deck, this is a -1/-1 counter deck, which I think is a very cool and unique strategy for the Dimir colors. Typically you see that in Golgari or maybe Rakdos, so I'm very excited to see what he can bring to the table. And I know Doodle is a big fan of finding these old niche commanders and making them work in powerful and unexpected ways, so I have no doubt he's going to bring some cards to the table that I've probably never seen before. Moving on to Jason playing Ezio, and I believe this is like a starter deck Ezio. I don't think it was in the main Assassin's Creed set, but this is the kind of generic assassin Ezio that isn't the 5-color one, and I honestly think that makes it a lot more interesting. I think having the 5-color assassin commander that you can just kind of throw every assassin in kind of limits a little bit of the creativity. So I'm very excited to see what Jason can bring to the table with a Dimir assassin list. However, with that being said, I am terrified of the ability on Ezio to draw him a card every time an assassin deals combat damage, because that means that I have no doubt he will be very aggressive, very quick, and probably have a ton of ways to get in damage, draw a ton of cards, and then probably just control the game. And then finally, we get to our last opponent, which is Bilal with Zaxara, and I will be perfectly honest, I have played against Bilal's Zaxara deck before. This is 100% the deck that I am the most concerned about at the table. Bilal is very well known in our playgroup for being a bit of a combo player, and Zaxara can combo with almost anything. Being able to tap for 2 mana of any color means that as long as he can find ways to pay to untap it, he can very quickly generate infinite mana, and then with his X spells, probably just draw his deck and win the game. So Zaxara is definitely the deck that I am paying the closest attention to, and we'll probably have to focus down with some of our attacks, but we'll see how it goes. Either way, I am very excited for this game. I hope you all are as well. Please let me know down in the comments what your predictions are. Who do you think is going to walk out the winner? And as always, if you haven't already, I would love it if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. So with that being said, let's get into this game, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Doodle goes first, followed by myself, Jason, and then Bilal. On Doodle's first turn, he plays a swamp. I play an Obscura Storefront, sacrificing it, gaining a life, and searching my library for a plains, putting it into play tapped. Jason plays an island and casts Soul Ring. Bilal plays a swamp, casts his own Soul Ring, then also casts Thought Vessel, gaining no maximum hand size. Doodle plays an Esper Panorama. I play a swamp and cast Charming Prince, scrying 2 when it enters. Jason plays a swamp and casts Hookblade Veteran, which has flying as long as it's his turn. Then he also casts Vorpal Sword and passes. On Bilal's turn, he simply plays an island, then passes. But at the end of turn, Doodle sacrifices his Esper Panorama to search his library for an island, putting it into play tapped. On Doodle's turn, he plays a swamp and casts Necroskitter, which has Wither and returns any opponent's creature that dies to the battlefield under his control, as long as it had a -1/-1 counter on it. I play an Urza's Cave, then cast Savine's Reclamation, returning a permanent with mana value 3 or less from my graveyard to the battlefield, specifically returning Obscura Storefront, which once again sacrifices itself to let me gain a life and search my library for a plains, putting it into play tapped. Finally, I attack Bilal for 2 with Charming Prince. Jason moves straight to combat, attacking me for 1, then in his second main phase, cast Thorn of the Black Rose, becoming the Monarch and drawing a card for it at the end of turn. Also at the end of turn, Bilal casts Stroke of Genius for X=2, drawing 2 cards. On Bilal's turn, he casts Hangerback Walker for X=2, entering with 2 +1/+1 counters on it and making 2 Thopter tokens when it dies. Doodle plays an island and casts Astral Cornucopia for X=1, so it enters with 1 charge counter and can tap for mana equal to the number of counters on it. On my turn, I cast a Trove Warden, allowing me to exile a card with mana value 3 or less from my graveyard when a land enters under my control, and then put those cards into play when the Warden dies. This allows me to play a Plains and exile Obscura Storefront. Jason attacks me for 1 with the Hookblade Veteran, allowing him to cast Eagle Vision in his second main phase for its free running cost, drawing 3 cards. He then plays a Terramorphic Expanse and casts Doomblade, destroying my Trove Warden, putting Obscura Storefront into play under my control, making me sacrifice it, gain a life, and search my library for a swamp, putting it into play tapped. At the same time, Jason sacrifices his Terramorphic Expanse, searching his library for a swamp, putting it into play tapped. Finally, he draws a card at the end of turn for being the Monarch. Bilal casts a Drown in Dreams for X=2, drawing 2 cards, then plays a Windswept Heath, immediately sacrificing it, losing a life, to search his library for a Zagoth Triome, putting it into play. Doodle plays an island and casts Fate Stitcher, which can tap to untap target permanent. On my turn, I sacrifice Urza's Cave, searching my library for a land, specifically Riveteer's Overlook, putting it into play tapped, sacrificing it, gaining a life, and searching my library for a swamp, putting it into play tapped. Once that resolves, I cast Samwise the Stout-Hearted, returning Riveteer's Overlook from my graveyard to my hand since it entered the graveyard this turn. That means I can then play the Riveteer's Overlook, sacrifice it, gain a life, and search my library for a swamp, putting it into play tapped. On Jason's turn, he attacks Doodle for 1, then in his second main phase, cast Massacre Girl, giving all other creatures -1/-1 until the end of turn, and whenever a creature dies this turn, giving all his other creatures another -1/-1. This winds up killing all the creatures in play except for Massacre Girl herself, even killing the Thopters that Bilal creates when Hangerback Walker dies. Finally, Jason plays a Path of Ancestry and draws at the end of turn. On Bilal's turn, he casts his commander, Zaxara the Exemplary, which can tap for 2 mana and creates a 0/0 green Hydra token with X +1/+1 counters on it whenever he casts a spell with X in its casting cost. Doodle plays an island, then casts his commander, Skeleton Ship, which can tap to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. On my turn, I cast my commander, Minthara Merciless Soul, getting an experience counter in my end step if a permanent left my battlefield that turn, giving my creatures +X/+0 and Minthara ward X, where X is the number of experience counters I have. Jason plays an island and attacks Bilal for 4 with Massacre Girl, then in his second main phase, casts Brotherhood Ambushers for its free running cost. Then he also cast Lydia Fry, letting him now surveil X in his end step, where X is the number of tapped assassins he controls. This means when he moves to his end step, he surveils 1, then draws a card. On Bilal's turn, he casts Freed from the Real, enchanting Zaxara. Notably, this gives Bilal the ability to untap Zaxara for 1 mana, which can let him create infinite mana when combined with Zaxara's ability to tap for 2. Knowing this, Doodle casts Negate to counter Bilal's spell, but Bilal has an answer, countering the Negate with Delay. However, not wanting to lose the game, I respond by casting Generous Gift, destroying Zaxara and replacing it with a 3/3 elephant token and fizzling Freed from the Real. Once that's resolved, Bilal casts Nylea's Intervention for X equals 1, searching his library for a land, specifically Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, putting it into his hand before playing it, turning all lands into swamps in addition to their other types. Doodle cast Pemin's Aura, enchanting Skeleton Ship, allowing Doodle to pay a mana to untap it, give it flying until the end of turn, give it Shroud until the end of turn, give it +1/-1, or give it -1/+1. On my turn, I cast Retreat to Emeria, now letting me either make a 1/1 core ally creature token, or give my creatures +1/+1 until the end of turn, whenever a land enters under my control. After that, I play a Field of Ruin, making a core ally token that is represented by a ginger candy because I couldn't find my tokens, and I immediately sacrifice the Field of Ruin to destroy Bilal's Triome, letting each player search their libraries for a basic land, putting them into play, making another ally token, and then, when I move to my end step, I get an experience counter with Minthara. On Jason's turn, he casts Rooftop Bypass, now creating a 1/1 assassin creature token with Menace whenever 1 or more non-token creatures he controls deal combat damage to a player. This lets him attack Bilal for 4 with Massacre Girl, making an assassin token, then at the end of turn he surveils 1 and draws a card. On Bilal's turn, he casts Reality Shift, exiling Skeleton Ship, but Doodle responds, activating Pemin's Aura to give it Shroud, fizzling the spell. After that, Bilal casts Mistcutter Hydra for X equals 4, entering with 4 counters and having protection from blue. Then at the end of turn, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship to put a -1/-1 counter on Brotherhood Ambushers and uses Pemin's Aura to untap the ship. He has enough mana to repeat this process 2 more times, putting a total of 3 -1/-1 counters on the Ambushers. In response, Jason casts Become Anonymous, exiling the Ambushers and the top 2 cards of his library, shuffling them, cloaking them, and putting them into play tapped. Unfortunately for Jason, Doodle is still able to activate Skeleton Ship, putting enough -1/-1 counters onto the Ambushers to kill them and fizzle Become Anonymous. Then, on Doodle's turn, he plays an island and casts his own Massacre Girl, this one being Massacre Girl Known Killer, letting Doodle draw a card whenever a creature an opponent controls dies if it had toughness 0 or less. On my turn, I play a Swamp, making an ally token, and flashback Savine's Reclamation, putting Obscura Storefront and Riveteer's Overlook into play from my graveyard, sacrificing them, gaining 2 life, and searching my library for a Plains and a Swamp, putting them into play tapped and making 4 allies. I then attack Jason for 2 with the allies, claiming the Monarchy, drawing for it at the end of turn, and getting another experience counter going to 2. Jason plays a Shizo Death Storehouse and casts his commander Ezio Blade of Vengeance, now letting him draw a card whenever an assassin he controls deals combat damage to an opponent. He then attacks me for 1 with an assassin, and attacks Doodle for 5 with Massacre Girl and Lydia, but before damage, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship twice, putting a -1/-1 counter on Lydia, killing her and drawing a card, before Jason deals 4 damage to Doodle and 1 damage to me, drawing himself 2 cards, making an assassin token and reclaiming the Monarchy. Then, in his second main phase, Jason casts Petty Larceny for its free running cost, looking at the top 2 cards of Doodle's library, exiling them face down, being able to cast them and making a treasure token. Notably, due to the limitations of playing over Spell Table, Doodle just reveals the cards. Finally, Jason casts Doodle's 1,000-Year Elixir, letting his creatures activate their abilities as though they had haste, and then draws at the end of his turn. On Bilal's turn, he cast Orixmathes' Slumbering Isle, entering with 4 slumber counters, removing a counter from it whenever he casts a spell, and turning it into a creature when it has no counters. Then, he attacks Jason for 3 with his elephant, taking the monarchy and drawing for it at the end of turn. Also at the end of turn, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship 3 times, killing 3 of my ally tokens and drawing 3 cards. Unfortunately for Doodle, since a permanent now left my battlefield this turn, I'm able to cast Fatal Push, destroying his Massacre Girl since it has mana value 4 or less. On Doodle's turn, he plays an island and casts Siphon Mind, making each opponent discard a card, and then he draws cards equal to the number of cards discarded this way, which is 3. On my turn, I cast Legion Loyalty, giving all my creatures Myriad. In response, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship twice, killing 2 more of my ally tokens. Then, I attack Doodle with both of my remaining allies for 6, creating 2 additional tokens attacking each of my other opponents for 6. Before blocks, Doodle activates the Skeleton Ship 2 more times, killing my last allies, while Jason and Bilal both block one of the tokens attacking them, taking 3 damage, before my tokens are sacrificed and I claim the monarchy. Finally, at the end of turn, I go up to 3 experience counters and draw a card. Jason moves straight to combat, attacking me for 4 with Massacre Girl, taking the monarchy, and attacking Doodle for 5 with Ezio and 2 assassin tokens. This lets him create another assassin token and draw 4 cards. Then, in his second main phase, Jason plays an island and casts Midnight Assassin, followed by casting Royal Assassin, which can tap to destroy target tapped creature. Then at the end of turn, Jason draws a card for being the Monarch. On Bilal's turn, he cast an Arcane Signet, removing a counter from Orixmathes, and at the end of turn, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship twice, putting a counter on Royal Assassin, killing it, and also putting a counter on Ezio. On Doodle's turn, he plays an island and casts Crumbling Ashes, now destroying target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it in his upkeep. On my turn, I play a Jund Panorama, making another ally token, and cast Callous Blood Mage, drawing a card and losing a life when it enters. I also cast Keeper of the Accord, now making a 1/1 soldier token in each opponent's end step if they control more creatures than I do, and searching my library for a plains, putting it into play tapped if they control more lands than I do. Finally, I sacrifice Jund Panorama, searching my library for a swamp, putting it into play, making an ally, and going up to 4 experience counters at the end of turn. On Jason's turn, he moves straight to combat, attacking Doodle with his entire board for 12 total damage. Before the blocks, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship a total of 6 times, killing Ezio and 2 assassin tokens, now only taking 6 damage, while Jason makes an assassin token. Then, in his second main phase, Jason casts Back in Town for X = 8, returning 6 outlaws from his graveyard to the battlefield. This lets him get back Ezio, Royal Assassin, Thorn of the Black Rose, Evie Fry, Lydia Fry, Brotherhood Ambushers, Hookblade Veteran, and Brotherhood Patriarch. The only one of them that triggers when it enters is Evie Fry, letting Jason search his library for her partner, Jacob Fry, putting him into his hand. After that has resolved, Jason moves to his end step and draws for being the Monarch, but also at the end of turn, I make a soldier token, while Bilal flashes in Thrix the Sudden Storm, making his spells with mana value 5 or greater cost 1 less, and making them unable to be countered. On Bilal's turn, he cast a Hydroid Crassus for X = 9, letting him draw 4 cards, gain 4 life, and put 9 +1/+1 counters on the Crassus. After that, he plays a Forest and attacks Doodle for 4 with Thrix. Before the damage though, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship twice, putting two -1/-1 counters on Thrix, so that he only takes 2 damage. Finally, at the end of turn, Doodle activates Skeleton Ship one more time, putting a -1/-1 counter on Ezio. In Doodle's upkeep, he destroys Ezio since it has a -1/-1 counter on it, then plays a Karn's Bastion. After that, he casts Grave Betrayal, now returning any creature that would die under an opponent's control to the battlefield under Doodle's control with a +1/+1 counter in the next end step. This lets Doodle activate Skeleton Ship 3 times, killing Thrix and returning the giant to the battlefield under his control with a +1/+1 counter at the end of turn. He also attempts to activate Skeleton Ship to kill Callous Blood Mage, but I respond by casting Eerie Interlude, exiling the Blood Mage and Keeper of the Accord, returning them at the end of turn. However, since Doodle still has more mana, he activates Skeleton Ship again, killing the Blood Mage in response, returning it to his battlefield at the end of turn with a +1/+1 counter and making a Pest token. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Bilal with all of my creatures except Minthara for 22 total damage, triggering Myriad on all of them, so Jason and Doodle also get token copies of all of my creatures, attacking them for 22. Bilal blocks 12 of the damage, killing my Keeper of the Accord, an ally token, and his Elephant token, taking 10 damage. Jason blocks 12 of the damage, killing his Hookblade Veteran and Brotherhood Patriarch, gaining 2 life when it dies and doing 2 damage to each opponent, then taking 10 damage while I become the Monarch, and Doodle blocks all of the damage, killing his Callous Blood Mage and Pest, gaining a life. Then in my second main phase, I cast Hammers of Moradin, which has Myriad and taps a creature for each of my opponents whenever it attacks. Finally, I move to my end step, going up to 5 experience counters and drawing a card. Jason activates the Royal Assassin, tapping it to destroy Doodle's Skeleton Ship. At this point, we also remember that Grave Betrayal should have triggered at the end of turn, so Doodle puts Keeper of the Accord, Hookblade Veteran, and Brotherhood Patriarch into play under his control with a +1/+1 counter. Then, Jason moves to combat, attacking me for 3 with Lydia, and attacking Doodle for 1 with Midnight Assassin, making another Assassin token and reclaiming the Monarchy. In his second main phase, Jason casts Chain Assassination for its free running cost, destroying Hammers of Moradin and drawing a card. After that, he casts Ravenloft Adventurers, taking the initiative, searching his library for a basic land, and putting it into his hand. Notably, the Adventurer also now exiles any creature that dies under an opponent's control with a hit counter on it. Finally, at the end of turn, Jason draws a card and Doodle puts Hammers of Moradin into play with a +1/+1 counter. On Bilal's turn, he simply untaps and passes. Doodle plays an island and casts Diabolic Tutor, searching his library for a card and putting it into his hand. Once that resolves, Doodle recasts his commander, the Skeleton Ship, and attacks me with Hammers of Moradin for 3, triggering Myriad to create a token copy of it, also attacking Jason and Bilal, tapping down one of my allies, Massacre Girl, and Hydroid Crassus. Jason blocks with an Assassin, killing it, and Bilal blocks with his Hydra, while I take 3. On my turn, I play an Escape Tunnel, making an ally token, then I attack Jason with 2 of my allies for 12, triggering Myriad to create copies of them, also attacking Doodle and Bilal. Doodle blocks with Brotherhood Patriarch and Hookblade Veteran, killing both creatures, gaining 2 life and doing 2 damage to each opponent. Jason blocks with Brotherhood Ambushers, killing it, and also activates Royal Assassin to destroy the other token attacking him, and Bilal takes the damage, going to only 4 life. In Jason's upkeep, he takes the initiative, scrying 2, and casts Crippling Fear, naming Assassin, so all non-assassin creatures get -3/-3 until the end of turn, killing Skeleton Ship, Minthara, and my ally token. This allows him to safely attack Bilal for 4 with Massacre Girl, and attack me for 14 with most of his other assassins. Before damage though, Bilal casts Assassin's Trophy to destroy Massacre Girl, but Jason responds by casting Remand, returning the removal spell to Bilal's hand and drawing a card. However, this means Bilal can simply recast the Assassin's Trophy, again targeting Massacre Girl, this time destroying it and letting Jason search his library for a basic land, putting it into play. Then damage happens, with Bilal taking nothing and staying in the game, while I take the full 14 and Jason makes an Assassin token. In his second main phase, Jason plays a Drowned Catacombs and casts Sign in Blood, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life. Then, at the end of turn, Jason surveils 4, draws a card, and Doodle returns Massacre Girl to his battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. Unfortunately for the rest of us, this means that all creatures get -1/-1, then another -1/-1 for each creature that dies this turn, meaning all creatures other than Massacre Girl die. Also at the end of turn, Bilal casts Commander's Insight for x=4, drawing a total of 5 cards. Then, on Bilal's turn, he casts Boundless Realms, searching his library for 7 basic lands and putting them into play tapped since he controls 7 lands. At the end of turn, Doodle puts all the creatures that died last turn into play under his control, meaning he gains control of Ravenloft Adventurer, taking the initiative, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into his hand, Thorn of the Black Rose, becoming the Monarch, Royal Assassin, Midnight Assassin, Brotherhood Ambushers, Lydia Fry, Evie Fry, Hydroid Crassus, and Mistcutter Hydra. Then in Doodle's upkeep, he takes the initiative, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Lydia, plays a swamp and moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 4, attacking me for 18, and attacking Jason for 10. Before the damage though, Jason casts Murder, destroying Brotherhood Assassins that are attacking me, keeping me in the game. Still before the damage, Bilal casts Nourishing Shoal for x=3, gaining 3 life, also keeping himself in the game. Finally, damage happens with Bilal taking 4, Jason taking 10, and I take 11. In Doodle's second main phase, he casts a Chakram Retriever, now untapping target creature whenever he casts a spell on his turn. He also casts Propaganda, making each opponent pay 2 mana to attack him and untapping Lydia, then also casts Throne of Geth, untapping Midnight Assassin. Finally, he moves to his end step, surveilling 6 and drawing a card since he's the Monarch. Also at the end of turn, I sacrifice my Escape Tunnel to search my library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped and making another ally token. On my turn, I play a Grixis Panorama, making another ally token, and recast my commander, Minthara. Jason cast Adewale, Breaker of Chains, revealing the top 6 cards of his library, putting an assassin, pirate, or vehicle from among them into his hand, but unfortunately he doesn't find any. After that, he cast Achilles Davenport, giving his other assassins +1/+1, and also cast Poison Blade Mentor, giving another assassin death touch until the end of turn whenever it attacks. Finally, he cast a Trot of the Silencer, and then passes. Bilal plays a swamp and casts Nirkana Revenant, now adding an additional black mana when he taps his swamps, which, thanks to Urborg, all of his lands are. This means he can cast Villainous Wealth for x=22, making me exile the top 22 cards of my library and letting Bilal cast any number of them that are mana value 22 or less without paying their mana costs. With this, he casts Iridescent Vinelasher, Acrobatic Maneuver, Ruin Ghost, Fortune Loyal Steed, Pegasus Guardian, Adeline Resplendent Cathar, Dalek Squadron, Quetzal's Flanker, Lulu Loyal Hollyphant, Sun Titan, Deep Gnome Terramancer, Saravok Deathbringer, Solemn Simulacrum, Call for Unity, Cartographer's Hawk, Battle Angels of Tyr, and Surveyor's Scope. Once all of the ETBs resolve, Bilal winds up gaining 2 life, scrying 2, exiling Nirkana Revenant, returning it to play, drawing a card, returning Freed from the Real from his graveyard to the battlefield attached to Nirkana Revenant, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play, doing 1 damage to each opponent. Finally, at the end of turn, Bilal puts a counter on Call for Unity, giving all of his creatures +1/+1. Unfortunately for Bilal though, in Doodle's upkeep, he takes the initiative, making Bilal lose 5 life and knocking him out of the game. Notably, since Bilal cast all of my spells, they're exiled when he leaves. Then, Doodle cast Horobi, Death's Wail, destroying any creature that is targeted, and also recast his commander, the Skeleton Ship. This triggers Chakram Retriever, untapping Achilles, but because of Horobi, it's destroyed instead. This lets him attack me for 7 with Lydia and Midnight Assassin, and attack Jason with the rest of his board for a total of 17. Before blocks though, I cast Ephemerate, targeting Minthara. Because of the Horobi, this means she's destroyed, but now that her ability is no longer pumping my tokens, I'm able to use one of them to block Lydia as it's now got less than 3 power, killing the token while I only take 4, staying in the game. Still before blocks though, Doodle cast Dramatic Reversal, untapping all of his non-land permanents and destroying Jason's mentor. This means that even after Jason blocks, he still takes 14 damage, knocking him out of the game. Unfortunately, I still have no way to make Doodle out on my turn, so I simply cast Philia Exuberant Shepherd, followed by another round for X=5, exiling Philia and returning her to play 6 total times. Obviously, this doesn't do anything except give me a sense of satisfaction, as Doodle can easily untap on his turn and attack me for lethal, winning Doodle the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. I really enjoyed playing this Minthara deck. I really felt like I was doing everything that I personally enjoy out of Commander. Playing white, one of my favorite colors, and I'll be honest, I'm not usually a fan of black in Commander, but I do think it added quite a bit to this deck in ways that I wasn't really expecting. Being able to get some of the Myriad creatures and some of the Landfall, it was very powerful, and it really felt like it could do a lot of very powerful things if I could have ever untapped with any creatures, which unfortunately with Skeleton Ship at the table, I was unable to do so. So a very powerful showing, but definitely a difficult game to play when the goal is to make a ton of 1/1s that get buffed up by Minthara, when those 1/1s don't buff their toughness and there's -1/-1 counters flying around, so a little unfortunate on our end. Moving around the table, Jason looked like a pretty big threat for most of that game. He had quite the board at multiple points and was drawing a ton of cards, making a ton of assassin tokens, and finding ways to kind of sneak through combat damage. I was kind of impressed with how many assassins had some form of evasion or at least some form of preventing blocking if that was like death touch or unblockable. So it was very cool to see, and he did not really play any non-Assassin's Creed cards, and I was also very impressed with how synergistic and how powerful that deck felt with basically just Assassin's Creed cards. I haven't played with them too much, but I think after this game I'm definitely going to look into some on my own. Moving around to Bilal, he almost won the game at a couple of different points, being able to almost go infinite with Zaxara, which I called earlier if you'll remember, and only being stopped because 2 separate players had some form of interaction, Doodle with the counterspell and myself with the removal spell. If only one of us had reactions, then I imagine Bilal with his singular counterspell could have easily prevented that and then gone on to win the game. So he got a little unlucky at that point, and I continue to be the person who thwarts Bilal the most in our game, so I will gladly take that. But the other time that he almost won with the Villainous Wealth for 22 off the top of my library, unfortunately only being able to get up to 5 life meant he still died to Doodle on Doodle's next turn thanks to the initiative, but if Bilal had been able to gain even just a single more life, I do think there is a solid chance he comes back and wins there, because he got a tremendous amount of value, which admittedly mostly came from our deck, but it was still very cool to see. And then finally, of course, last but not least, our winner of the game, Doodle. Congratulations to Doodle. His deck really showcased a lot of very unique synergies, and I think the fact that he was able to get the Pemin's Aura onto Skeleton Ship very early on meant that he could control the board, could take care of any of his opponent's creatures that may have been threats, and then eventually, once he was able to start stealing his opponent's creatures, especially once that Massacre Girl hit the board, there was not much the rest of us were going to be able to do to stop him, because we needed to wipe the board to deal with what he was doing, but if we wiped the board, we then gave him the rest of our creatures. So it really became a lose-lose situation, and Doodle kind of just killed us with 1,000 paper cuts along the way, but it was very impressive to see, and honestly, I think Skeleton Ship, or the Bone Boat, as Doodle would call it, really showed out in that game and put in a ton of work. So, with all of that being said, thank you so much to everybody for watching this far into the video. I know this was a very long one. The game was about 2.5 hours before it was edited down, and so you can imagine just how much happened in that game. But once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you have not, I would love it if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. But as always, have an amazing day, everyone, and I will see you on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.